I was abused by 5 men, including my boss, in workplace orgies where they treated me like a slave for years until I decided to get my revenge on them one sip at a time. None of them suspected that I was exacting my vengeance while they called me their cook. That's right, you heard me correctly. I planned everything while looking them in the eyes, one by one. They dropped like flies, and nobody ever suspected it was me, a simple boarding house cook who could barely write her own name. I delivered justice with my own hands in the only way I knew how, and not for a single day in these past 60 years have I ever regretted it. The cook's justice. I was abused by 5 men, including my boss, in workplace orgies where they treated me like a slave for years until I decided to get my revenge on them one sip at a time. None of them suspected that I was exacting my vengeance while they called me their cook. That's right, you heard me correctly. I planned everything while looking them in the eyes, one by one. They dropped like flies, and nobody ever suspected it was me, a simple boarding house cook who could barely write her own name. I delivered justice with my own hands in the only way I knew how, and not for a single day in these past 60 years have I ever regretted it. Music. My name is Geraldine Messiah Quincy, but around Westbrook, everyone knows me as Granny D. I just turned 87 years old. I'm a little old lady, 5 feet tall with sun-spotted skin and hands calloused from a lifetime of work. My hair, once jet black, is now white as cotton, and I always keep it in a bun to help with the heat we get here. They say my eyes are my most striking feature. People tell me I have brown eyes that seem to see into your soul. I guess I learned to look that way from years of watching others, of needing to anticipate what was coming to protect myself. Now that I've introduced myself, I want to know about you listening to me now. What corner of America are you watching from? What's your name, friend? Tell me in the comments. I like to imagine my voice reaching places this old woman from small-town Mississippi never got to visit in person. Maybe one of you is right here near Westbrook and has tried my special jambalaya at the restaurant, or maybe my pulled pork with cornbread that makes folks lick their fingers clean. What a wonderful coincidence that would be. I'd be so happy I'd want to give you a hug. Today I live in a simple but spacious house here on the outskirts of Westbrook. Nothing fancy, mind you, but for someone who once slept in a maid's room smaller than a closet, this place is a palace. I'm very proud of my yard that I still tend with my own hands. I've planted every herb, every seasoning I use in my kitchen: basil, oregano, rosemary, sage, mint, and also medicinal herbs I've used since I was a girl: chamomile, lemon balm, lemongrass, rue. More plants than you can imagine. And there in the hidden corner, I still have a small Jimson weed plant that was my salvation when I needed it most. The kitchen is the heart of my home. I have a wood-burning stove that I had custom-made just for me, identical to the one I used as a child. That's where I prepare my most special recipes, the ones that need low, steady heat that slowly cooks, capturing all the flavor. The smell of wood smoke mixed with fresh herbs is the most delicious scent in this world. I also have a regular stove, refrigerator, all those modern conveniences, but nothing compares to food cooked on a wood stove with patience and love. And it's in this kitchen that I keep my greatest treasure, a small wooden mortar and pestle, an ancient one I've carried with me since I was 15. It's worn from so much use, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in this world. It was with this that I prepared the spices that made my reputation. And well, it was with this that I ground the herbs that changed my life forever. It even has a secret compartment underneath that nobody ever discovered. Today there's nothing in there anymore, but it once held things nobody could even dream of. My restaurant, Flavors of the Earth, is now famous throughout the region. It started small in a rented room with an old stove and a few tables. Today, I have 6 locations spread across Mississippi. People come from far away just to taste my cooking. You know, I've even served important politicians, TV stars, famous singers. Everyone who passes through Westbrook and has a connection in town ends up eating here. Some people say my chicken and dumplings is the best in America. Others swear my gumbo has no equal. The secret is in the spices, the patience, and in some herbs that only I know how to use just right. But success never went to my head. I'm still the same old Granny D, getting up early to gather my herbs, to test new recipes. I don't spend all day in the restaurant kitchen anymore. My legs can't take it. But I still personally prepare some special dishes, especially when out-of-town guests arrive. And most importantly, I make a point of only hiring women who have faced hardships in life, just like I once did. Every woman who works in my restaurants has a story of suffering to tell. This gives me such pride, seeing these women who arrive with their heads down, afraid of everything and everyone, and after a few months, they're holding their heads high, smiling, making plans. I call them all my heart daughters. I've helped over 200 women get back on their feet. Some have become restaurant managers, others have opened their own businesses, some have even gone to study culinary arts in the capital. Seeing their success is almost more satisfying than seeing my own. I've even been called a hero, but I'm nothing like that. I just know well what it's like to suffer and have no one extend a hand. I know what it's like to stand at the edge of the abyss and think there's no way out. And I also know that sometimes an old wooden mortar and pestle and knowledge of certain plants can be the salvation when nobody else can help. When people ask me how I did it, how I escaped that life of suffering and built all this, I give them the standard answer: hard work, perseverance, never giving up. It's what people want to hear. But the truth, the real truth, very few people know. It's a story I've kept inside for more than 60 years, afraid people would judge me, condemn me, or worse, not believe me. What I'm about to tell you now, I've kept secret for over 60 years. Even my granddaughter, who's filming this video, has never heard the complete story. But today, friend, I'm going to unburden myself. But first, let me start this story properly. It's not a pretty story, not the kind you tell children before bedtime. It's a cruel story from a time when poor girls like me were worth nothing, when justice only existed for the rich and powerful. In 1952, I was 14 years old and living in Brookhaven, up in the northern part of the state. My father had died from a mysterious fever 2 years earlier, and my mother was struggling to raise 8 children alone. Hunger was our daily companion. We lived in a small wooden shack with a dirt floor. We all slept crowded into a single room, but at least we were together, you know? I had the affection, the protection. Or at least, I thought I did. One day, a man named Arthur Mendez showed up at our house. He arrived well-dressed in a shiny car, saying he owned a boarding house in Westbrook and needed someone around my age to help with cooking. He offered a monthly wage and even a chance to attend school. For a starving family like ours, it seemed like a miracle. Mama, with a heavy heart, agreed to send me. One less mouth to feed and the promise of a better life for me. How could it go wrong? Well, it did. I packed my few belongings, tucked my grandmother's mortar and pestle among my clothes so it wouldn't break, and there I went in the back of a truck to a town I'd never heard of, to work for a man I barely knew. I had no idea about the hell that awaited me. I couldn't imagine that decision would change my life forever, and in a way no one could have predicted. That I, a skinny, illiterate girl, would become judge, jury, and executioner of 5 powerful men. That I would be the death they never saw coming, served in a steaming cup every morning. I'll tell everything without hiding anything. How they treated me, what they made me endure, and how slowly I found my own way to deliver justice. A justice no one would deliver for me. A justice sipped with coffee, with the bitter taste of revenge. But let me go back to the beginning, or you won't understand anything. I was born in Brookhaven in a homestead so small it barely shows on the map. It was just a little piece of land my father, Mr. Manuel, managed to buy after years of working for others. Poor, rocky soil that didn't yield much. But it was ours. Daddy woke up before dawn, long before sunrise, and only returned after dark. Sometimes we'd go all day without really seeing him. He was a quiet man of few words, but with steady hands and a good heart. Mama, Mrs. Irene, besides taking care of the house and us, took in laundry. She would gather loads and loads of dirty clothes from the wealthier families in Brookhaven and go to the river, even under the hot sun. She'd return with her back bent from bending over at the riverbank, her hands red and cracked from the harsh soap. But she never complained. She always said, "As long as I have my health, we have plenty," but real plenty we never knew. We were 8 siblings, all stair-steps. I was born in the middle, the 3rd daughter. Above me were Jessie and Tony, who had been helping Daddy in the field since they were little. Below me came Lourdes, Sebastian, Abigail, Joseph Peter, and little Mary, the baby who was born a year before Daddy died. When she arrived, Mama was already so worn out from life that she didn't even have milk for the poor little thing. She was fed from an improvised wooden bottle with goat's milk when we had it. We didn't have much, but we had some simple joys that I miss today. I remember the smell of the earth after the rain, which in Mississippi isn't an everyday thing. When it rained, it seemed like a blessing. The smell of that wet earth would fill your nostrils and give you a feeling that everything would get better. We children would all run out to feel that water falling from the sky, to see the dust turning to mud, to hear the sound of water hitting the thatched roof. Food was scarce, but the taste hasn't left my mouth to this day. The beans slowly cooked on the wood stove, seasoned with just a little pork fat and a sprig of rosemary that Mama grew in a corner of the yard. The peeled potatoes boiled in salted water that, when good, would melt in your mouth. Sometimes, when we were lucky, Daddy would bring home a small piece of meat, and then it was a celebration. Cornbread, well, that was only for very special occasions when the field yielded a good harvest. The smell of that bread, baking in the wood oven, would fill the whole house, and we would stand there, looking through the crack in the oven door, waiting for it to be ready. It was a delight that no bakery cake can come close to. Every morning, we would wake up to the rooster's crow. It was as punctual as a clock. Then came the sound of the cows mooing, wanting to be milked, the goats, the grunting of the pig fattening in the little pen. The birds. Oh, they made such a celebration. There were thrushes, cardinals, bluebirds, a whole bunch of them that I don't even know the names of. They formed a choir that not even a conductor could organize better. That time was good, you know. We were poor, but we were happy in our own way. Everything changed when Daddy got sick. It was in 1950. I had just turned 12. It started with a fever that wouldn't break. He, who had never spent a day in bed in his life, suddenly couldn't even get up. He shook so much it seemed like he would break his bones. He'd sweat cold, then come that heat that not even a wet cloth on his forehead would relieve. Mama tried everything. Herbal teas of all kinds, poultices of clay with herbs on the soles of his feet, as the old midwife from our region taught. Nothing helped. When she saw there was no other way, Mama sold the only two valuable objects we had, her wedding ring and a small silver crucifix that had belonged to her grandmother. With the money, she paid for a wagon to take Daddy to town to see the doctor. I remember him being carried, already too weak to walk, his eyes sunken, his skin yellowish. He seemed like he wasn't the same man anymore. The doctor examined him, gave some expensive medicines, but said he didn't really know what it was. Could be typhoid, could be malaria, could be a curse, who knows, he said, according to Mama. Daddy returned home, but never got up again. He kept getting weaker, thinner, until one June dawn, with frost covering the ground outside, he took his last breath. There wasn't a proper wake. We had no money for a coffin. So the neighbors helped make one from old boards. He was buried in the small community cemetery under a yellow magnolia tree. Mama cried silently, in that contained way of someone who knows they can't afford to collapse because they have 8 children depending on them. That's when poverty, which was already our companion, became a cruel and relentless mistress. Without Daddy working in the fields, food became even scarcer. Mama washed even more laundry from dawn to night, but the money was never enough. The older boys, Jessie and Tony, tried to maintain the plantation, but they were too young, didn't have the experience or strength of Daddy. The harvest dwindled. The animals were sold one by one to buy food. Soon, it became clear that we couldn't keep all the children at home anymore. The first to leave was my sister Lourdes, a year younger than me. A merchant family in town needed someone to help with their small children. They offered housing, food, and some old clothes in exchange for work. They didn't mention payment. Mama cried in secret all night, but the next morning she packed Lourdes's little bundle and took her. "It's for your own good, daughter," she repeated, as if trying to convince herself. Lourdes was 11 years old and hadn't seen her family for almost 3 years when I left home. Then it was Sebastian, who was 10, sent to work on a farm dealing with cattle, sleeping in the barn with the farmhands. Once in a while he'd send word saying he was fine, but the handwriting on the paper was shaky, from someone who barely knew how to write. And so it went. 2 more siblings given away to wealthy families in exchange for the promise that they would be well treated, that they would have food to eat, clothes to wear, maybe even study. Promises. Little news came afterward. Then it was my turn. Mama took care of everyone else before herself. She was getting weaker, her hands getting more and more bent from washing clothes in the cold river water. Even when she tried to hide it, I could see the tear marks on her face when she thought no one was looking. I knew my turn to leave home was coming too. It was the fate of almost every poor girl in that place, to become a maid in someone's house, a nanny to someone else's children, until she grew up enough to marry and have her own children, repeating the cycle. It was in a hot September that he appeared. Mr. Arthur Mendez arrived mounted on a well-groomed black horse, wearing clean, starched clothes, a felt hat on his head. In our community, where everyone walked barefoot and wore patched clothes, he looked like a lord. He asked at Mr. Antinor's store where he could find families with girls who knew how to cook, who wanted an opportunity in the big city. It was Mr. Antinor himself who pointed him to our house. Mrs. Irene, I came because I heard you have a talented daughter who knows how to cook, he said, sitting on our porch, accepting the watery coffee that Mama offered. I have a boarding house in Westbrook, the Good Rest, and I'm looking for an honest, hard-working young lady to help in the kitchen. He spoke in a honeyed tone, looking now at Mama, now at me as I served the coffee, trembling with nervousness, eyeing that stranger from the corner of my eye. Mr. Arthur explained that his boarding house was frequented by good people, merchants, farmers, sometimes even a politician or two passing through the region. He said he needed an assistant cook who would learn quickly, who was clean and respectful. He offered housing, food, clean clothes, and wages at the end of the month. And you can even study if you want, like a real lady. There's a school in town that you can attend in your spare time. For people living like us, this sounded like a gift from heaven. After so much suffering, Mama wanted to believe that at least one of her children would have a better chance. And I, fool that I was, believed it too. I thought I would work hard, yes, but that at least I would have something to eat every day, that I could maybe send a little money home at the end of the month, that perhaps I would even learn to read and write properly, something that in the rural school where I studied for a few years, I never managed. The decision was made that same afternoon. I would go with Mr. Arthur the next morning. I spent the night packing my bundle, 2 sets of patched clothes, the only good dress I had that I only wore to church, a broken comb, and the small wooden mortar and pestle that had belonged to my grandmother. I put everything in a burlap sack and tied it well. We barely slept that night. Mama spent the time teaching me the recipes she knew, telling me how I should behave, repeating that I should be honest and work hard, show that I was worth the opportunity. The farewell the next day was the saddest thing I had experienced until then. Jessie and Tony had left early for the field. They gave me a quick hug before going, without many words, because men don't cry or show feelings. That's what they were taught from an early age. But the little ones, oh, the little ones didn't understand why their sister was leaving. Abigail, 8 years old, grabbed onto my skirt and wouldn't let go. Joseph Peter, 6, hid under the bed and refused to come out to say goodbye. And little Mary, with her 3 years, wouldn't stop crying, asking to be held, not understanding that I wouldn't be back anytime soon. Mama tried to be strong, but I saw the tremor in her lips, her misty eyes when she hugged me one last time. She whispered in my ear, "Be strong, my daughter. God go with you, and Our Lady protect you." She placed a small fabric pouch around my neck, a sachet with a prayer and a bit of soil from our homestead. "So you never forget where you came from," she explained. That sachet stayed with me for many years, until they took it from me along with the rest of my dignity. I climbed into the back of the truck with 2 men who were carrying sacks of supplies. Mr. Arthur rode his horse, guiding the truck along the dirt road. As we moved away, I looked back and saw Mama standing in front of our little house, the little ones clinging to her skirt, all of them waving. It was the last time I saw them. The image is etched in my memory, as clear as if it were yesterday, even after so many decades. The journey was difficult, 2 days bouncing in the back of that old truck on potholed roads under sun and dust. At night, we stopped somewhere by the roadside. The men set up an improvised camp, lit a fire. Mr. Arthur had me cook the food, rice, beans, and a bit of jerky he had brought. I slept curled up in a corner of the truck bed, away from the men, wrapped in the thin blanket I had brought, the burlap sack serving as a pillow. Nobody bothered me during the trip, but I already felt a chill in my stomach, a premonition I couldn't name. We arrived in Westbrook in the late afternoon of the second day. It was the first big town I had ever seen. For a girl raised in the countryside, it seemed huge, noisy, frightening. So many houses, so many people, so many cars and trucks on the streets. I stood with my mouth open, looking at everything, feeling tiny before this new world. Mr. Arthur walked ahead, and I followed behind like a lost puppy, clutching my little bundle of clothes. The Good Rest boarding house was on a street a bit away from the center. It was an old wooden mansion painted a faded blue, with a porch in front and a large yard in the back. At the top of the door, a slightly crooked sign announced the name of the place. From a distance, it even looked nice, welcoming. But as we got closer, I saw that the paint was peeling in several places, that the front garden was poorly maintained, that some of the floorboards on the porch were loose. Entering, I saw a large room that served as the reception and common area. There were some old chairs, a long table where the guests ate, and in a corner, a small table with bottles of drinks. The walls had moisture stains, and a smell of mold mixed with cigarette smoke hung in the air. At the back was a corridor that led to the rooms. There were about 10 of them, all small, with simple beds, a nightstand, and nothing more. Most of the rooms didn't even have a bathroom. The guests shared 2 bathrooms at the end of the corridor. To the right of the main room was the kitchen, a spacious but dark room with a huge wood stove and a slightly rusty gas one, a large wooden table in the center where food was prepared, and shelves on the walls full of pots, plates, and supplies. It was there that I spent most of my time in the following years. At the back, leaving the kitchen, there was a small, stuffy room with 3 thin mattresses on the floor. "This is where you'll sleep," said Mr. Arthur, along with the other girls. The other girls? I met them soon after. There were 3. Nora, about 20, who had been working there the longest. Claudia, a bit older, approaching 30, who took care of the laundry. And Claire, who was about my age and helped with everything. They all had the same downcast look, the same way of walking with their heads down, of speaking in whispers. That night, lying on the thin mattress, hearing the strange noises of that big house, I felt fear for the first time. But I still thought it was just the shock of being in a new place, far from home. Right on the first day, Mr. Arthur asked for my documents. I only had my birth certificate, yellowed and torn at the edges. "I need to keep it in a safe place," he said, taking the paper and putting it in a folder. I never saw my birth certificate again. I started working before the sun even rose. The routine was heavy: light the wood stove, prepare coffee, porridge, and bread for the guests' breakfast, then help Nora with lunch, wash dishes, clean the kitchen, prepare dinner, wash dishes again. I only stopped when everything was clean and ready for the next day, often after midnight. In the first week, I still had hope. I worked hard, wanting to show that I was a good employee, that I deserved that opportunity. When I asked about school, Mr. Arthur evaded, saying that for now I needed to learn the job well, that later we would think about that. When the end of the month came and I timidly asked about payment, the first unpleasant surprise came. "Payment?" He laughed, a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you've already paid off the debt for the trip and what you eat and where you sleep? All this costs money, girl. It's going to take time until you make up for what I've already spent on you." I tried to argue, to say that the agreement was different, but he cut me off with a hard, threatening look. "If you're not satisfied, you can leave. But don't forget that we're far from your home and you don't have a penny in your pocket. How are you going to get back, walking?" And he turned his back on me, ending the subject. It was then that I began to realize I had fallen into a trap, that I wasn't an employee but a prisoner, that Mr. Arthur's promises weren't worth the paper they weren't written on. But the worst, the very worst, was yet to come. Soon I began to notice the looks, not just from Mr. Arthur but from the guests too. Looks that lingered too long, that traveled up and down my body, that had a hunger different from hunger for food. Especially a group of men who came frequently to the boarding house. There were 5 of them. Mr. Arthur himself, Colonel Justin, an old thin farmer that all the girls feared, Ambrose, a cattle trader known for his violence when he drank, Owen, the local bank manager who on the outside seemed like a respectable man, and Dr. Faust, the town doctor, the only one who sometimes showed a glimmer of shame in his eyes. They gathered once a month to drink, play cards, and, well, do things that a 14-year-old girl shouldn't even know existed, much less witness. I still remember the first time I saw them all together. It was evening. I was serving dinner when Colonel Justin grabbed me by the wrist, too hard to be just a casual gesture. "Is this one new, Arthur?" he asked, examining me as if I were an animal for sale. "Yes," replied my boss with a strange smile. "She arrived a little while ago, but she's almost ready for us to test." I didn't understand at the time what he meant by ready or test, but I would soon understand in the worst possible way. The first time I was beaten at the boarding house was just 15 days after I arrived. It was Mr. Arthur's birthday, and he wanted a cornbread with guava paste. Nora, who cooked better than all of us, had a high fever, lying in the back room. Claudia didn't know how to make cake, so it fell to me. I tried to do the best I could, but the boarding house's wood stove was different from what I knew at home. It heated too much on one side, too little on the other. When I opened the oven, I saw the disaster. One side burnt black as coal, the other raw, the batter still runny. I tried to hide it, thought about making another, but Mr. Arthur had already entered the kitchen, attracted by the smell of burning. His small eyes narrowed when he saw the ruined cake. "Is this what you do on my birthday, you useless girl?" he shouted. Before I could explain myself, the slap came, hard and direct. It caught me on the left side of the face with so much force that I fell sitting on the kitchen floor. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I had bitten my tongue with the impact, but he didn't stop there. He grabbed the still hot cake and rubbed it in my face, on the burnt part. "Feel how it tastes, you incompetent. Is this what you serve your boss on his day?" The skin on my face burned. Blisters formed immediately. I had the mark of his 5 fingers on my face for almost a month, and peeling skin where the burnt cake had touched. That's when I truly understood that I wasn't an employee at all. I was property, like furniture or an animal. And this certainty became even clearer when, after working a whole month without a day off, from before sunrise until long after it set, I timidly asked about my payment. Mr. Arthur gave a laugh that chilled me to the bone. "Payment? And you think you've paid the debt you have to me? The trip here, the food you eat every day, the bed where you sleep, the clothes I gave you, all this has a price, foolish girl. It's going to take a long time until you start to see any money." I protested, said that wasn't what he had promised, that he had talked about a salary from the beginning. He looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "Want to leave? Go ahead. But how? Without money, without documents, in the middle of nowhere. And who would believe you against me? A respected man in this town." That's when the trap completely closed. It wasn't just a matter of hard work, of a demanding boss. It was slavery, disguised as employment. And the worst was yet to come. There were 5 men who regularly frequented the boarding house, who formed a kind of club. The leader was Mr. Arthur himself, owner of the boarding house, a fat man in his 50s. He would sweat just walking from the kitchen to the living room. His face was always red and shiny with grease. He wore a hat even inside the house, and when he took it off, it revealed a baldness that he tried to hide by combing the few strands of hair over the top. He had small hands for a man of his size, with short, thick fingers like sausages, always with a large gold ring on his pinky finger. Colonel Justin was the oldest and most respected of the group, a 65-year-old farmer, thin as a stick, tall, always in impeccable clothing, even in the hottest weather. He wasn't a real colonel. It was a title people used because he had so much power in the region, so much land, so much cattle. They said he had ordered people killed for much less than a disagreement, that he had henchmen spread all over the state. His gaze was the most frightening, clear eyes, almost transparent, that seemed to have no soul behind them. Ambrose was a cattle merchant in his 40s who traveled throughout the region buying and selling bulls. He was strong, his neck as thick as a normal man's thigh, his hands calloused from hard work. When he was sober, he was even quiet, but when he drank, and he drank a lot, he turned into an animal. He had already killed 2 men in bar fights and gotten away free both times. Everyone knew he paid bribes to sheriffs and judges in 3 different towns. Owen was the least threatening at first glance. The local bank manager, a man of distinguished appearance, always in a well-pressed suit, his hair well cut and combed with brilliantine. He spoke softly, was educated, attended church on Sundays with his wife, the daughter of a rich farmer, and 3 children. He treated everyone with a broad smile when he was on the street, greeted even the maids with a "good morning" or "how are you?" But behind all this facade, he was the worst of them, the most perverted, the most cruel, precisely because you never expected it. Finally, there was Dr. I.K. Faust, the town's doctor, a man in his mid-50s, a widower who lived in a big house near the square. He was the only one who sometimes showed some sign of conscience, some remorse in his eyes. Once he even gave me a painkiller after Ambrose had been particularly brutal, as if a pill could compensate for what he himself also did. They gathered at the boarding house once a month, always on the night of the full moon. Colonel Justin was superstitious. He said the full moon increased men's potency. They called it the Friends' Dinner, but we, the staff, knew it by another name, the Night of Terror. It started like a normal dinner. We served good food that Mr. Arthur had ordered prepared, especially with the best he had. Roasted suckling pig, fried chicken, jambalaya made with the finest jerky, and drinks, lots of drinks. Good whiskey that Mr. Arthur kept locked in a cabinet just for these occasions. Wine, beer. They ate, drank, told stories, laughed loudly. Then came the card game. Usually they bet high. Money, cattle, sometimes even land. And they bet other things too. That's when the night began to take on a darker tone. Now, before telling the heaviest part of the story, I want to see who really has the courage to keep listening. I bet you won't even have the stomach to click that like button after what I'm about to tell. Only the strong-hearted will be able to go all the way to the end and still give a like. Are you brave enough? When the drinks had flowed freely and the game was coming to an end, Mr. Arthur would stand up and announce with a disgusting smile that it was time for dessert. He would clap his hands 3 times, and we would be called in one by one, Nora, Claudia, me, and any other girl who might be working at the boarding house at the time. We would stand in line, heads down, trembling with fear. They examined us as if we were animals at a cattle auction, commenting on our bodies, on who they thought looked fresh that night. Sometimes they bet at the card table, with the winner having the right to choose first. Other times they fought among themselves, each wanting a specific one. I, being the youngest, was always the most disputed. "Young, juicy one has the tenderest flesh, right?" Colonel Justin would say, passing his hand over my face while I tried not to vomit from the smell of liquor and cigar that came from him. "This one is still green," Ambrose would comment, pinching me so hard that he left purple marks on my arms, on my thighs. Owen liked to pretend he was gentle. "Come to Uncle," he would say in that soft voice, offering me a candy as if I were a little child. "I'll treat you well today." It was a lie, of course. His kindness ended as soon as the door to the room closed. Dr. Faust at least didn't pretend. He would stand there quietly, eyes downcast, as if he were ashamed. But that didn't stop him from doing the same things as the others. And Mr. Arthur, he thought he owned us. He said that since he had bought us, he had the right to use us as he wished and to lend us to his friends. I tried to resist the first time, when Mr. Arthur announced that I would be served that night. I screamed, I begged, I tried to run to the kitchen, but Ambrose grabbed me with those huge hands, immobilizing me as if I were a rag doll. They laughed at my resistance, found it entertaining. "That's how it's good, boys," Colonel Justin commented. "When they struggle, the fun is much more enjoyable." Mr. Arthur said that since he had brought me to the boarding house, he had the right to go first, and the others agreed, but on the condition that they could watch. And so it was. They took me to his room, threw me on the bed like a sack of potatoes. I tried to cover myself, to protect myself, but what good did it do? They were 5 grown men against a 14-year-old girl. What happened that night, and on so many others afterward, is difficult to tell, not just because of the shame, the trauma, but because they did things I didn't even know existed. They laid me on that old bed, tore my simple dress as if it were paper. I was shaking so hard that the bed rattled. Tears streaming down nonstop while I begged them to let me go, said I wanted to return to my mother. They just laughed. Mr. Arthur was the first. He took off his hat and belt, but kept the rest of his clothes on, only opening what was necessary. The others stood around the bed, watching everything with bottles of drink in hand. They formed a circle around me like a macabre ritual, giving opinions, suggesting positions, ways to hold me when I tried to struggle. Hold her arms like this. Turn her on her side. Cover her mouth so the guests don't hear. They drank and toasted as if they were at a party, not in a room where a 14-year-old girl was being violated. Mr. Arthur was sweating so much that it dripped on me, a fat, fetid sweat that mixed with the smell of alcohol. He groaned and said things in my ear that I was his, that he had bought me, that he could do whatever he wanted. He boasted to his friends. This one I brought all the way from Brookhaven, so young she didn't know anything yet. I'm the one teaching her everything. They laughed, applauded, as if it were some great feat. When he finished, he stood up, adjusting his clothes, all proud. The others applauded, as if he had done something admirable. Now whose turn is it? He asked, as if he were offering a piece of cake at a party. Colonel Justin was next. He was different. He liked to cause pain on purpose. He pulled my hair hard enough to tear out clumps, bit my shoulders and arms leaving deep marks, squeezed my neck until I almost passed out from lack of air. Cry louder, he would say, increasing the pressure when I tried to contain myself. I like it when they cry. He took a special pleasure in seeing the fear in my eyes, in seeing me trying to escape with nowhere to go. Each of my screams seemed to feed something sick inside him. Then came Ambrose, strong as a bull. He barely needed to hold me down. His weight alone was enough to immobilize me. His whiskey breath was so strong it made me nauseous. He was clumsy, rough, with no consideration for whether he was hurting me or not. "She's just a little maid, not even a person," he would tell the others when I complained of pain. Sometimes he drank so much that he couldn't finish what he started, and then he would get even angrier. He would hit me, blaming me for his own failure. Owen was the cruelest in a different way. He liked to humiliate, to make me feel less than an animal, forced me into shameful positions, to do degrading things while he watched with that polite smile he showed on the street. "That's it. Now say you're enjoying it," he would order, and if I didn't obey, he had sophisticated methods of pain. He knew exactly where to press, where to twist to cause the maximum suffering without leaving visible marks. "I learned anatomy in school," he bragged to the others. "I know exactly where it hurts the most." Dr. Faust was the last. By the time his turn came, I was already so hurt, so exhausted, that I could barely keep my eyes open. He liked to pretend he was still a doctor even at those times, speaking technical terms, treating me like a patient. "I'm going to examine you now," he would say in a falsely professional tone. This might be a little uncomfortable. It was his way of trying to disguise to himself what he was doing, I think, as if by calling it by other names, it would become something else. And they never left right after finishing. They would stay there, drinking more, talking about me as if I were an object they had just used. They compared performances, gave scores to each other, discussed what had been better or worse. "Next time we'll do it differently," they planned, as if they were talking about the next card game. And I, thrown on that bed, was completely ignored, except when one of them decided to return for another round, as they called it. The worst of all was seeing the pleasure they felt, not just in the act itself, but in knowing they had total power over me, that they could do anything, that nobody would come to help me, that I had nowhere to escape to. The next day, they acted as if nothing had happened. They had breakfast that I served, read a newspaper, talked about business. Owen returned to the bank, Dr. Faust to his clinic, Colonel Justin to his farm, Ambrose to his travels. Mr. Arthur stayed at the boarding house, giving orders, yelling about anything out of place, and when our eyes met, he would smile a smile that said, "Soon, it's the full moon again." And the worst thing is, it always came again. When they were all present, sometimes they forced me to satisfy 2 or 3 at the same time. Every orifice of my body was used, abused, violated. They boasted, competed among themselves, commented on each other's performance. It was as if I weren't even human, just an object for their pleasure, without feelings, without dignity. The other girls went through the same thing. Nora, who had been there for years, had a dead look during these nights. She did everything mechanically, like a robot, as if her soul had left her body and only left the shell for them to use. Claudia cried silently the whole time, tears streaming down her face without a sound. They didn't like it when we made noise, except for the sounds they told us to make. When the night finally ended, around 3 or 4 in the morning, they would fall asleep scattered throughout the rooms of the boarding house. We would slip into the bathroom, one by one, to try to wash off that disgusting feeling from our skin. We would scrub until it hurt, until it bled in some places. But the filth they left seemed to be inside, where no water could reach. The next day, we had to wake up at the normal time and work as if nothing had happened. Prepare breakfast for them, serve, clean, smile when they ordered, and they acted as if the previous night hadn't existed. Owen would go back to being the respectable bank manager, Dr. E. Faust, the attentive doctor, Colonel Justin, the powerful farmer, Ambrose, the successful merchant. Mr. Arthur treated us like maids until the next full moon. This repeated every month. There was no escape, no rest. Sometimes between one full moon and another, one of them would show up alone at the boarding house and demand special service. Mr. Arthur never refused. After all, they were his friends, his accomplices, and he himself would use any of us whenever he wanted, at any time of day or night. He just had to tap his fingers on the table in a specific way, and we already knew what it meant. Claire, a girl who arrived shortly before me, couldn't take it anymore. After a particularly brutal night with Ambrose, who had drunk more than usual and used her in ways I can't even describe, she waited for everyone to fall asleep and hanged herself with a sheet tied to a ceiling beam. It was Mr. Arthur who found her body in the morning. She didn't even get a funeral. She was thrown into a mass grave at the cemetery without a name on the cross, with no one to pray for her except us, the other prisoners of that hell. Seeing what happened to Claire made me decide I wasn't going to end like that. I wasn't going to let myself be completely destroyed. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of breaking me to the point of taking my own life. I would survive one way or another, and maybe one day escape. After 6 months in that place, I thought I had found my chance. It was a Sunday. Mr. Arthur had gone to town to participate in a cattle auction and would only return at night. Nora was sick. She was always sick. Her body couldn't take the abuse anymore. Claudia was busy with the laundry. No one was paying attention to me. I grabbed my little bundle hidden under the mattress, just my grandmother's mortar and pestle and a few coins I had managed to save, and went out through the kitchen window. I jumped over the low wall that separated the boarding house from the back street and began to run like I'd never run in my life, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode, the adrenaline rushing through my veins, the sensation of freedom, even if momentary. I managed to reach the road that left town. I didn't know where to go. I just knew it had to be far from there. I walked for hours, my feet already bleeding in the old shoes, the strong sun punishing me. But each step seemed to take me closer to freedom, farther from that hell. I hadn't even walked 9 miles when I heard the sound of a motor. I hid in a bush by the roadside, my heart almost coming out of my mouth. A car passed straight by, and I breathed relieved, but soon another vehicle was coming, more slowly. It was Ambrose's pickup. He passed where I was, slowed down as if he had noticed something, then continued. I thought I had escaped. I left my hiding place and continued walking more quickly, wanting to take advantage of the fact that the road seemed empty. That's when I heard the engine again, closer. Before I could hide again, the pickup pulled up beside me and Ambrose jumped out. "Look what we have here, a little mouse escaping from the mousetrap," he said, with that whiskey breath that never left him, even in the morning. He grabbed me by the hair with force, dragging me to the pickup while I screamed and struggled. "Shut up, you wretch, or I'll break your teeth right here and now," he said as he threw me in the back like an animal. He tied my hands and feet with a rope he used to tie cattle, and we returned to Westbrook, to the boarding house, to the hell I had tried to escape from. The whole way back, he kept telling me what Mr. Arthur would do to me, the punishment I would receive this time. "I think he'll kill you, girl. And if he doesn't kill you, he'll make you wish you were dead." When we arrived, Mr. Arthur had already returned from the auction. Ambrose dragged me by the hair inside, threw me on the floor of the living room in front of everyone. The guests, the other staff, Mr. Arthur. "Look what I found trying to escape," he announced, kicking me in the ribs to make me get on all fours on the floor. The punishment was worse than I could have imagined. Mr. Arthur called the other three, Colonel Justin, Owen, and Dr. Faust. He wanted them all to see what happened to someone who tried to escape. Wanted it to be an example for all of us. I was tied to a chair in the middle of the room, and they beat me, each one of them, with belt, with open hand, with feet, with whatever they had at hand. Colonel Justin used his riding crop. Ambrose a piece of wet rope that hurt like fire when it touched the skin. Owen preferred to use his hands. He had heavy rings on all his fingers that opened cuts with each slap. Dr. Faust was the one who hit the least, but he still participated. Mr. Arthur used his favorite belt, the one with the big buckle that he proudly displayed. I was beaten until I passed out. When I woke up, I was thrown in the boarding house's cellar, a dark and damp place where they kept old boxes and food that was spoiling. I stayed there for 2 weeks, receiving a bit of water and leftover food once a day. The rest of the time it was just darkness and silence, broken sometimes by the sound of someone's footsteps up above or by the noise of the rats that shared that space with me. When they finally took me out of there, I could barely walk. I had lost so much weight that my ribs were showing. My skin was yellowish, my hair was falling out in clumps. But the worst weren't the physical marks. It was what had happened inside. Something had broken in me. The hopeful girl who still believed in the goodness of people had died in that dark cellar. I returned to work as if nothing had happened. I cooked, I cleaned, I served, and I endured the abuse of the 5. But inside, something had changed. It wasn't just fear and despair that I felt anymore. It was a cold, calculating rage, a determination to survive at any cost, and one day to make them pay for what they had done. It was about a month after my punishment that I met the person who would change my life forever, Ms. Janice. She was an elderly lady, an herb healer who knew everything about herbs and medicinal plants. She came once a week to the boarding house to sell her preparations, teas for stomach aches, ointments for wounds, tonics to raise men's spirits, as she would say with a knowing smile. Mr. Arthur let her in because her preparations really worked, and the guests liked them. He himself used a balm she made for his back pains. Besides, Ms. Janice was discreet. She didn't ask questions, didn't meddle where she wasn't called. But she observed with those small, lively eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. She noticed everything. The way we staff walked with our heads down, the poorly hidden bruises, the terror in our eyes when Mr. Arthur or one of the other 4 approached. One day, while I was helping her carry some pots of herbs to the kitchen, she took me by the arm in a gentle but firm way. She looked right into my eyes in that way that seemed to see my soul and whispered, "I know what happens here, girl, and I know you don't deserve this. None of you deserve this." I was paralyzed, not knowing what to say. It was the first time in a long time that someone had spoken to me as if I were a human being, not a thing, as if my pain mattered. I wanted to cry, to scream, to cling to her and beg her to take me away from there, but I had learned in the worst way that trusting someone could be dangerous. "I can't take you out of here now," she continued, still whispering. "They are powerful, have friends in the police, in the government, but I can teach you some things that will help." She placed in my hand a small cloth bag full of dried herbs. "This is for pain. Boil it in water and drink it when after they..." She didn't need to complete the sentence. I understood what she meant. I took the bag and hid it in the pocket of my apron. "Thank you," I whispered back, my voice barely coming out. "I come every Thursday," she said. "If you need anything, look for me. And remember, even the smallest and most fragile herb can bring down a big man if you know how to use it." At the time, I thought she was speaking figuratively, that she meant that even I, so weak and defenseless, could find strength to survive, to resist. Only later did I understand the true meaning of those words, that she was literally offering me a path. A dangerous path, yes, full of risks, but a path that could lead to the justice that the world would never give me. That night, lying on the thin mattress in the little room I shared with the others, While I listened to Mr. Arthur's snores coming from his room at the end of the corridor, I made a decision. I wasn't going to die there. I wasn't going to end up like Claire or like so many others before her. I was going to survive. I was going to endure whatever I had to endure. And one day, one way or another, I was going to get justice. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I felt deep in my soul that the answer was somehow linked to that wise-eyed, wrinkled-handed old lady who had looked at me not as a victim, nor as a thing, but as a potential warrior. The one who, without knowing it, had just planted in me the seed of vengeance. After that first conversation with Ms. Janice, something changed inside me. A small flame of hope that I thought had gone out began to flicker again. It wasn't a hope of escape. After the punishment I received for the failed attempt, I knew that running away wasn't an option. It was a different hope, darker perhaps, but it was the only one I had. I began to anxiously await Thursdays, the day Ms. Janice came to the boarding house to sell her preparations. While I helped her carry the pots and bottles, we exchanged words in whispers. At first, they were just simple instructions. This tea here helps with the wounds inside. This ointment relieves the pain in the parts they hurt the most. With time, she gained my trust, and I hers. One day, when there was no one around, she pulled me to a corner of the kitchen and said, "The herbs my grandmother taught me, the ones my mother taught me, the ones I teach women who need them, I need to teach you too, for when these cruel men." What began as remedies to alleviate my suffering gradually transformed into secret lessons about the power of plants. Ms. Janice knew every herb, every root, every flower of the southern woods. She knew what healed, and more importantly for my situation, what made you sick. Everything in nature has two sides, she explained. The same plant that saves can kill if used another way, in another quantity. One plant caught my attention, Jimson weed, that little flower that everyone has in their yard, that grows easily in any corner, that has beautiful white, purple, and blue blossoms, Ms. Janice would say. But there are others that look similar and are the worst. And the best thing is, they don't leave a trace after the person dies. I learned to identify the plant, to collect it secretly, to dry it, to prepare a concoction by boiling it with alcohol, then let it evaporate. All this I had to do without anyone noticing, hiding the strong smell. I already had a perfect hiding place, my wooden mortar and pestle, inheritance from my grandmother. It was the only thing I had managed to bring from home, and that, by some miracle, they hadn't taken from me. It had a false bottom, a secret compartment that only someone who knew it could find. It was there that I began to store my special medicine, as Ms. Janice called it. Small, carefully measured doses, ready for use. The plan took shape in my mind, little by little. It couldn't be anything hasty, nothing obvious. It had to seem natural. Coincidence, bad luck. And it had to start with the most vulnerable of the group. The one no one would suspect if he fell ill first, Dr. Faust. He was my first target, not because he was the best of them. None of them was good, but because he was a doctor. If he got sick and died of something apparently natural, no one would question it. After all, who teaches a doctor? I began to add small doses of the poison to the coffee I served him at breakfast. Everyone at the boarding house was a coffee drinker, and I always served it. Just a tiny bit, just a few grains mixed into the grounds. You couldn't taste it, couldn't smell it, couldn't see it. Day after day, it accumulated in his body. At first, nothing happened. I almost doubted if the poison was working. Then, around the third month, Dr. Faust began to complain of fatigue, of joint pains. "Must be age," the others would say. He himself diagnosed himself. Rheumatism, perhaps a bit of anemia. He prescribed tonics for himself, pills, injections that he himself administered. Nothing helped. By the 6th month, he was visibly thinner, his skin yellowish, his eyes sunken. He had fevers that came and went, night sweats, a dry cough that wouldn't go away. He began to miss the special dinners. He no longer had the energy for it. The others even complained, but made fun. "The doctor needs a vitamin from women," they would say, laughing. In the 8th month, Dr. Faust was found dead in bed. He had been staying at the boarding house for 3 days, treating some patients in town. They found him stiff, his mouth open in a silent scream, as if in the last moment he had understood what was happening. The official diagnosis: generalized infection of unknown origin. The body sometimes rots from the inside without us knowing why, explained the doctor, who came from another town to sign the death certificate. I watched the wake from afar, serving coffee to those who came to pay their condolences. Pure coffee without mixtures, for everyone except one. Ambrose was the second. With him, I increased the dose a little bit, not too much to raise suspicions, but enough to accelerate the process. He already drank too much. His liver was probably not in good shape, which helped the poison act faster. First came symptoms similar to a hangover: nausea, headache, fatigue. Nobody thought it strange. He was always drunk anyway. Then his skin began to yellow. His eyes became bloodshot. He lost his appetite, lost weight, his body swollen in some places, withered in others. "You're drinking too much, compadre," Mr. Arthur would warn, without knowing that the drink wasn't the problem. Or rather, not just the drink. 1 year and 2 months after I began to poison his coffee, Ambrose collapsed during a cattle sale. He was in the middle of the auction when he simply fell down, foaming at the mouth. They took him to the nearest hospital, but it was already too late. Acute liver failure, they said, the result of years of excess with whiskey. Everyone commented at the funeral. No one suspected anything. Colonel Justin was more difficult. He was thin, resistant like an old goat, and suspicious by nature. He didn't drink as much as Ambrose, didn't have Dr. Faust's vices with his own medicines. I began to increase the dose a tiny bit, but carefully. He was observant. If the coffee tasted different, he would notice immediately. It took longer for the symptoms to appear. First, it was a cough that wouldn't go away. Then breathing began to get difficult, as if his lungs were always full of something. He became more irritable, more violent, if that was possible. During the special nights, he could no longer do what he used to. His body wouldn't respond. He would get angry, take it out on the girls with slaps and punches, which only made his shortness of breath worse. 1 year and 9 months after I began to serve the special coffee to him, Colonel Justin had such a severe attack of shortness of breath that he fell from his chair during dinner, turning purple, convulsing. No one could help him. When the doctor arrived, he could only confirm death. Pulmonary emphysema was the diagnosis, common in men his age. They went looking for family for the funeral and discovered there was no one, just frightened employees who didn't even show up to say goodbye to their feared boss. Owen was the second to last. The bank manager, so careful with his appearance as a good man, began to waste away in a way he couldn't hide. First, it was chest pains that he disguised, then dizziness, fainting that he tried to explain as drops in blood pressure. I began to notice that he was taking medicine in secret, that he had secret consultations with doctors from other towns. He stopped coming to the boarding house as frequently. His visits became rarer, shorter. On the special nights, he appeared only to drink and talk, always making excuses not to participate in the main part, as they called it. The others made fun of him, called him a weakling, an old man before his time. They didn't know he was literally dying on his feet. 2 years and 4 months after I began to serve the poison to him, Owen had a heart attack in the middle of the bank, in front of several clients. He fell over his organized desk, knocking everything down, his eyes wide with terror. They said they tried to revive him for more than an hour without success. At the funeral, his elegant wife, dressed in black, cried discreetly. The already adult children seemed more concerned with the inheritance than with their father. No one mentioned his secret habits at the Good Rest boarding house. Finally, only Mr. Arthur was left. With him, I had to be even more patient. He was the only one who could suspect something, connect the dots, realize that all his friends had died in similar circumstances in recent years. I kept the dose small, constant, working slowly. 3 years after starting my plan, Mr. Arthur was unrecognizable. The fat, imposing man had become a thin, bent shadow, his skin flaccid, hanging where before there was fat. He suffered from everything: constant headaches, digestive problems, weakness in his legs, blurred vision. He consulted several doctors, took all kinds of medicine, made promises to all the saints. Nothing helped. What surprised me most was that even sick, even weak, he didn't stop the abuse. It decreased, of course. The body no longer allowed the excesses of before, but he still called us to his room, still used us as objects. The difference was that now, while he did what he did, I didn't cry anymore. I looked into his eyes with a slight, almost imperceptible smile, knowing that each day could be the last. And so it was until the end. One morning, I went to take coffee to him, as I did every day. I gave 2 knocks on the door as usual. No response. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I opened the door slowly and found him in bed, his eyes open, fixed on the ceiling, his face contorted in an expression of pain. He was dead, had been for several hours from how stiff he was. I found myself standing there, looking at the empty shell of the man who had been my tormentor for so long, and felt peace. Just peace. "He's dead! Someone call a doctor! Quick!" I shouted out, playing the part of the frightened maid perfectly. There was a coffee cup, that one that I had prepared with a slightly larger dose than the previous ones, just to make sure, still full on the nightstand. No one touched it in the confusion. The doctor who came to confirm the death was perplexed. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, examining the body. "It seems like all the organs failed at the same time. Heart, kidneys, liver, lungs, everything stopped working." He looked around the room as if searching for clues. "Did he take any medication? Did he eat anything strange?" "Just the usual, doctor," I replied, lowering my eyes like the humble servant they thought I was. "The breakfast coffee that I served every day, the same way, in the same cup. Now tell me something honestly. Do you think what I did was wrong? I killed 5 men slowly with poison in their coffee, looking into their eyes every day as they wasted away. Was I a murderer? Or did I deliver justice where no one else would? What would you have done in my place, knowing they would continue destroying the lives of other girls like me? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you think about this." With Mr. Arthur's death, everything changed at the boarding house. We discovered he had no close family, no relative who was interested in the business. There was a nephew in Atlanta who appeared only to sell the property and take the money. He didn't even want to know what would happen to the staff, to Uncle's protégé, as he called us with contempt. The boarding house was sold to a merchant from town who had other plans for the location. He wanted to transform it into a warehouse. All of us were dismissed with just the payment for the last month, the first and only one that many of us received after years of work. For the first time in 3 years, I found myself free. I could go wherever I wanted, do whatever I pleased. The problem was that I had nowhere to go, and I didn't know how to do much beyond cooking and cleaning. I was 17 years old, but much older inside. Suffering ages a person inside and out. It was Ms. Janice who saved me in this difficult time when I had just left the boarding house. "I don't have a palace," she said, "but I have a little corner where you can settle in." Her house was small but cozy, on the outskirts of Westbrook. It had a huge yard full of all kinds of plants, those she used for remedies, for seasonings, for her special preparations. In the back, a small garden provided almost everything we needed to eat. It was simple, but after the hell of the boarding house, it seemed like paradise. Living with Ms. Janice, I learned much more than how to poison coffee. I learned to heal, too, to identify medicinal plants, to prepare ointments and teas that relieved pain, healed wounds, lowered fever. I learned ancient recipes that were passed down from generation to generation in her family. And most importantly, I learned to really cook. Not just the basics I made at the boarding house, but elaborate, flavorful dishes with seasonings that made all the difference. It was Ms. Janice who also helped me get my first real job. "I know the owner of the Country Flavor restaurant nearby," she said one day. "He needs a kitchen assistant. I told him about you. He wants to meet you." The restaurant was modest, frequented by workers, travelers, simple people who wanted good food at a fair price. The owner, Mr. Juvencio, was an elderly man, a widower, who had set up the business after retiring as a railway worker. He gave me a chance even though I was so young and without formal experience. I started washing dishes, peeling vegetables, doing the most basic work, but soon Mr. Juvencio realized I had a way with food, with seasonings. "Where did you learn to cook like this, girl?" he would ask, surprised at the flavor I could give even to the simplest dish. "From the women in my family," I replied, without going into details. In a way, it was true. I had learned from my mother, my grandmother through the mortar and pestle she left me, and from Ms. Janice, who had become a kind of adoptive mother to me. Little by little, I took on more responsibilities at the restaurant. From assistant, I became a cook, then head cook. Customers began to come specifically to taste my dishes. "I want that meat that only Geraldine knows how to make," they would say. "Bring that beans with Geraldine's special seasoning." My name became a kind of guarantee of quality. While I built this new life, I never stopped thinking about the family I had left behind. My mother, my siblings, the small homestead in Brookhaven. When I managed to save a bit of money, I decided it was time to look for them, to find out what had happened to them all these years. The trip to Brookhaven was strange, being on the same road but this time by my own choice, as a free woman, not as a deceived girl. The small town had changed little. It remained small, peaceful, with the same simple houses, the same central square, the same little white church. I asked about my family at Mr. Antonor's store, which still existed, now run by his son. The family of Mr. Manuel who lived on the homestead by the river. His widow, Mrs. Irene. The young man scratched his head, trying to remember. "Oh yes, I know. It's been a long time since they don't live around here anymore. After Mrs. Irene passed away, the children scattered, each went their own way. It was like a stab in the heart. My mother had died thinking I was alive somewhere, perhaps even happy, as Mr. Arthur had promised. She died without knowing the truth, without knowing the hell I had gone through. In a way, it was better this way, that she had kept the illusion that her daughter was well, that the sacrifice of sending me away had been worth it. I managed to discover that my older brothers had gone to Jackson, that the girls had married and gone to other states. About the youngest, no one knew anything. I thought about looking for them, but something stopped me. What would I say? How would I explain the years of absence? What had happened to me? What I had done? Some stories are too heavy to share, even with family. I decided it was better to let them continue their lives without the weight of my past. I returned to Westbrook with a lighter heart in a way. Now I knew I had no one waiting for me anymore, no one wondering where I was. I was truly free, free to build my own life from here on out. It was around this time that I began to shelter women who had been through situations similar to mine. First, it was Juliet, who arrived at the restaurant all bruised, fleeing from her husband who beat her. I gave her food, a little place to sleep in the back of the restaurant. Then I helped her get a job as a cleaner in a store. Then came Margaret, a 15-year-old girl who had been sold by her stepfather to work in a house that was actually a disguised brothel. She managed to escape before the worst happened. I also took her in, taught her to cook, gave her a roof until she stabilized. One by one, these women began to arrive as if there were some kind of invisible communication between those who suffer, some sign that only they recognize. "Go look for Geraldine from Country Flavor. She'll help you," they would tell one another. And I helped in whatever way I could, with food, with a place to sleep for a few nights, with temporary work, with a shoulder to cry on, with advice based on my harsh experience. Behind all this help was the certainty that what I had done, slowly poisoning 5 men who had destroyed my childhood and youth, had been worth it, not just for my own liberation, but for all the other women who would have suffered at their hands if they had continued to live. How many girls like me would have been brought to the Good Rest boarding house if Mr. Arthur hadn't drunk that last coffee? I never regretted it, never lost a night's sleep thinking about the 5 men I killed, but I also never told anyone until today, until this account. Some stories need to be kept for decades, until all those involved have already departed from this world, until there is no more danger in revealing them. And so that 14-year-old girl who was deceived and abused transformed into a determined woman set on making a difference, using her pain as fuel for something greater. My mortar and pestle, the one that hid the poison that liberated so many women without them knowing, came to hold only healing herbs, seasonings that gave flavor to life, not death. A subtle but powerful transformation, just like my own. I worked at the Country Flavor restaurant for almost 7 years. Each month, I saved a little of my salary, hidden in an empty jam can buried in the back of Ms. Janice's yard. I saved every last penny, dreaming of the day I could have my own place, Mr. Juvencio was a good boss. He taught me a lot about how to run a business beyond cooking. When he started getting older with fragile health, he called me for a conversation. "Geraldine, I'm thinking of selling the restaurant. I can't handle the pace anymore. I'd like it to go to someone who will take care of it with the same love I did." It was my chance, but the money I had saved wasn't even half the value he was asking. I told Ms. Janice about the proposal, disappointed that I couldn't afford it. That's when she surprised me. She opened a trap door in the floor of her living room, revealing a hole where she kept a wooden box. Inside were some old jewels, gold coins, some high-value bills. "This here is my life insurance," she explained. "I've been saving for years to ensure I wouldn't be in need in my old age, but I see you need it more than I do." With Ms. Janice's loan, which I later made a point of paying back to the last penny, I bought the restaurant from Mr. Juvencio. It wasn't anything grand, a dining room with 10 tables, a small but functional kitchen, and a loyal clientele. I kept the name for a while out of respect for Mr. Juvencio, but when he passed away a few months later, I changed it to Flavors of the Earth. It was just me at first, doing everything: purchases, accounts, cleaning, cooking. In the first few months, I could barely make enough to support myself, much less pay employees. That's when Rita arrived, a woman in her 30s, purple from being beaten so much by her husband, with 2 small children. She had fled home with what she could hastily gather, but the money was already running out. She needed work, and most importantly, a place where her husband wouldn't find her. "I know how to clean. I know how to iron," she would say, almost begging. "I just need a chance." I remembered myself years ago, desperate for help that never came. I offered her not just a job, but a place to stay. I had a small room in the back of the restaurant that I hardly used. I slept at Ms. Janice's house anyway. Rita and her children could stay there until they got on their feet. She was the first. Then came so many others. Josephine, who had been raped by her boss in the house where she worked as a maid. Mary Carmen, who left an abusive relationship of years without having anywhere to go. Louise, a girl from the countryside, who had been brought to the city with promises of employment, but ended up forced into prostitution. Connie, who at 16 already had a child, abandoned by her boyfriend when he discovered she was pregnant. One by one, these women began to arrive as if there were some kind of invisible communication between those who suffer, some sign that only they recognize. "Go look for Geraldine from Country Flavor, she'll help you," they would tell one another. And I helped in whatever way I could. With food, with a place to sleep for a few nights, with temporary work, with a shoulder to cry on, with advice based on my harsh experience. At first, I offered just temporary work, a little place to stay, food on the table. With time, I realized I needed to create a better, more organized system. That's how my hiring philosophy was born. Only women, preferably those in vulnerable situations who needed more than a job, who needed a new chance in life. I taught them to cook, to serve, to manage, and most importantly, to value themselves again, to believe they deserved a dignified life. The restaurant began to gain fame, not just for the food, which was already recognized as among the best in the region, but for the atmosphere, the warm service, the care with every detail. Broken women found a home there, knowing they were among equals, that no one would judge them, that they could hold their heads high. Success came steadily. We knocked down the wall that separated us from the empty store next door, doubling the size of the dining room. The kitchen also grew, allowing more women to be trained. It was around this time that I began to receive invitations to cook for important events in town. Birthdays, graduations, even weddings. At first, I went personally, taking 1 or 2 helpers. Then the volume became so great that I had to put together special teams just for this. It was another opportunity to give work and training to the women who sought me out. The money, which was once so scarce, began to be abundant. I invested in better equipment, in top-quality ingredients, in more professional training for the employees. I bought a pickup truck to facilitate shopping and transportation for events. I built my own house, simple but comfortable, with a large yard where I could plant my own herbs and seasonings. That was just one part of the story. When I was 32 and the restaurant was celebrating its 5th anniversary, I made an important decision. We needed something more structured to help all those women who arrived asking for help. A restaurant, no matter how large and successful, couldn't handle it all. That's when I created the Flavors and Knowledge Foundation. The idea was to offer not just temporary jobs, but complete professional culinary training, a real course with a diploma that would allow students to find work anywhere afterward. The first year was experimental with only 10 students, using the restaurant's own kitchen as a classroom. The project was so successful that in the second year, we needed our own space. I bought a plot of land on the outskirts of Westbrook and built a simple but functional building with an industrial kitchen, classrooms, dormitories for students who had nowhere to stay, and even a daycare for their children. Everything was designed so that no woman would have to stop studying because she had no one to leave the children with. Little by little, the foundation grew. We secured sponsorships from companies, support from the municipal government, donations from people who believed in the cause. We hired professional teachers, expanded the curriculum to include not just cooking, but also business administration, marketing, entrepreneurship. We wanted the students to leave not just knowing how to cook, but prepared to open their own businesses if they so desired. And that's exactly what began to happen. Former students opening their own restaurants, catering businesses, bakeries, some in Westbrook itself, others in neighboring towns. When I realized it, we were creating a network. It was no longer just Flavors of the Earth. There were dozens of establishments spread throughout the region, all with the same philosophy, all giving opportunities to other women. I decided then to formalize this network. Instead of each one on their own, why not join forces? I created the umbrella brand Flavors of the Earth, with quality standards, common visual identity, a base menu that each restaurant could complement with local specialties. In exchange for using the brand, which was recognized and respected, the owners contributed a small percentage to the foundation. So what started as a small restaurant turned into 6 locations throughout Mississippi. It's not an empire, of course, but for someone who started with nothing, it's much more than I ever dreamed of. And more important than the number of restaurants is the number of lives we managed to transform. More than 200 women have already passed through the Flavors and Knowledge Foundation, and most of them today have their financial independence, their own business, their dignity back. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did, if I think I should have sought justice through official means, reported Mr. Arthur and the other 4 to the police, waited for the law to do its job. When I hear this, I can only laugh inside. What justice existed in those days for a poor country girl? What sheriff would believe my word against that of 5 respected men in society? Some people will say I did wrong, that I should have sought man's justice, but back then, for a poor girl like me, what justice existed? It was their word against mine, and they had money, power, influence, while I had nothing but my suffering. If I had reported them, I would most likely have been called a liar, a tramp, a loose woman who was asking for it. Or worse, I could have ended up like so many others who tried to report powerful men, found dead on the side of some road, just another unsolved case in the police files. I did what I needed to do to survive, to ensure they wouldn't do to others what they did to me, and I never felt remorse. Each of those men had destroyed dozens of lives before mine and would have destroyed dozens more after. How many girls like me were brought to the Good Rest boarding house before me? How many didn't survive to tell the story? Dr. Faust, with his respectable white coat, had been abusing vulnerable patients for years. Ambrose beat prostitutes in various cities he passed through, some even to death. Colonel Justin treated the daughters of his farm employees as if they were his property, just like his cattle. Owen, the impeccably groomed bank manager, used his position to blackmail women who needed loans. And Mr. Arthur, he was the worst of all, the center of that web of abuse and exploitation. The world is a better place without them. Each cup of coffee I served, each carefully measured dose, each death that seemed natural, all of it was an act of justice that no one else would perform for me or the others. You wonder how I was never discovered? Because no one suspects a quiet cook, an invisible woman. We were like furniture to them. We were there to serve, to be used, but not really seen as human beings, capable of thinking, of planning, of executing. It was this same prejudice, the same underestimation that allowed me to eliminate them one by one right under their noses. Today, looking back with the wisdom that the years bring, I have no doubts that I would do it all again. Perhaps more carefully, perhaps in a different way, but the result would be the same. Because I learned early on that in this world, sometimes you need to be your own heroine, your own savior, your own justice bringer. For the young women who are listening to me, I leave some advice that I learned the hard way, paying a price far too high. Trust your instinct, that little voice inside you that says something is wrong, that person isn't trustworthy, that situation is dangerous. It's rarely wrong. Don't ignore it out of politeness, social pressure, or fear of seeming rude. Watch for the signs of abuse before it's too late. A man who controls who you see, what you wear, where you go, who gets irritated when you express different opinions, who makes you feel small, incapable, dependent, who starts with small verbal aggressions before moving on to physical ones. Leave that relationship while you can. Seek financial independence, whatever it takes. Have your own money, your own bank account, your own savings. Knowledge, skills, and your own money are the greatest weapons a woman can have against dependency and abuse. Create a support network, other women who can help you when you need it, who will believe your word, who will offer you a safe place. That's what saved so many of the women who passed through my restaurant, knowing they weren't alone. And finally, never let them take your dignity, your self-worth. They can take everything else from you, your home, your money, your physical freedom. But if you keep yourself intact inside, if you don't let them break your spirit, you can always rebuild yourself. I'm 87 years old now. My body doesn't obey like it used to. My hands sometimes tremble when I'm cutting vegetables, my legs after a whole day in the kitchen, but my mind is still good, and my heart, despite all the scars, still beats strong. I no longer run the day-to-day of the restaurants. I leave that to my heart daughters, women I trained since they were girls, and who today are successful entrepreneurs. The foundation also has its own board of directors, made up of former students who stood out. My role now is more of a counselor, a guardian of ancient flavors and knowledge. I still live in the same house I built decades ago, with my yard full of herbs and seasonings. I still use the same wooden mortar and pestle from my grandmother, now more worn, more polished from constant use. Sometimes, when I'm grinding some seasoning there, I remember what it once held in the secret compartment at the bottom. The poison that was once the salvation, the lives I took to save so many others. I don't regret it. I never regretted it. If I had to do it all over again, I would do it without hesitation. And I'm sure other women out there have also found their own forms of justice, their own paths to survive in a world that often seems made to destroy us. I am Geraldine Messiah Quincy, but you can call me Granny D, and this has been the story of my life. A tale of pain, yes, but mainly of overcoming, of strength, of a woman who transformed the poison they tried to put in her life into nourishment that saved many others. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of women who faced the worst of life and still moved forward, subscribe here to the Grand, because wisdom doesn't come from books. It comes from life lived, and we old folks, we still have a lot to tell.